Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Ask the Actuary special of BWD's In The Know podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Adrienne Ostroff Lieberthal. She's CEO and founder of Athena Actuarial Consulting that provides advice across retirement and wealth and other areas of other industries. Also a co-founder of NAWA, the network of Actuarial Women and Allies. Adrienne, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your actuarial journey with us today, Adrienne. Now, I know an awful lot happened for you in 2020, the year that you founded Athena Actuarial Consulting, but I'm going to take you right back now to the start of your actuarial career. And tell me, Adrienne, how did you get into becoming an actuary?
Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast in Philadelphia. I was really focused on being a college student athlete in field hockey, which is really popular on the East Coast and actually in the UK and other countries. Not so popular where I live now in Minneapolis. But I was very focused on field hockey and liked math, but really was insisting that field hockey was going to be like my profession. So I had the privilege to play field hockey at University of Virginia. And so spent those 4 years in Charlottesville. It was an amazing experience. But it's very time intensive to be a Division I college athlete. And so I was starting to think about what was going to come next after college. Still was gravitating towards math, but was not as intrigued by the theoretical side of math. I really was starting to be drawn to that more applied financial side that aligns more with actuarial science. There was no actuarial science major. There was a professor who was particularly passionate about the career path, but there really wasn't even a concentration at that point. It was just that there were a couple people starting to take exams. And if you're not familiar with the field, it's really hard to grasp how intense these exams can be and how critical they are to pass a couple before you graduate in order to get that job. And so I sat for my first exam in the spring of maybe my sophomore junior year, and did not pass and was just devastated. But I think that kind of was a wake-up call as to how intense the exams really are and how I started to view it just like another competition or a game, against yourself, especially those early ones, P and FM. I feel like it's memorizing and just practicing and over and over. And so then I was really, really interested in that. I'm a very competitive person, especially with myself. So I became obsessed. Though it was hard to validate to my college field hockey coach why I needed to have time to study. So amidst the 30 hours of practice, the school, and whatever social life looked like at that time, which was minimal when studying for exams, I decided I'd have to take P and FM in the summer and do it alongside training. And I had just been denied, internships because I didn't have any exams. So I went through that cycle and wasn't successful. And I think that's really discouraging for those that have been through it. When you decide you want to be an actuary and the field is like, you should have decided this several years ago. And so I studied for P and FM. I sat for them. It was a Monday. I sat for P. Tuesday, I sat for FM. And Wednesday, preseason was starting. And I passed both of them. Went into my interview with Towers Watson a couple weeks later, and they were like, "What's different from last year?" And I told them that story, and they're like, "All right. I mean, I guess you're going to the next round of interviews."
Serious,
And I think it's interesting because that's how I landed in pension. I didn't seek it out. I just saw the word actuary. I was drawn to consulting because of the team-based environment that they described it as. And that's how I ended up at Towers Watson. They were the only company recruiting at UVA, given there wasn't a program there. There weren't as many companies recruiting. But it was a great place to start. My whole social life revolved around it. It was pre-COVID, where all the analysts are going out for happy hour. My roommates worked at Towers. Everything was aligned, and it was such a formative time in growing as an actuary, going through the exams together and that struggle together. I was there for a couple of years before I made the switch to Deloitte, where I was one of the early joiners in this new federal actuarial practice that at the time, my boss was starting, the person who later became my boss was starting, and I was just enamored with the idea of helping grow something. And that's where I really learned how to build a business, learned some skills that really helped translate later. The practice scaled really quickly. I got my FSA there, and then I think things kind of shifted in 2020, as you alluded to. But
was that still with pensions at Deloitte, or was it into different areas?
I started to have more exposure to OPEB and retiree medical plans, but it was pension, but it was public sector. So that was really different from when I worked at Towers. I was exclusively on large Fortune 500 companies, and shifting over to public sector, and not just state, local government, actually less of that and more in federal, which is where there's just these unique actuarial problems to solve. It's not traditional valuation work usually, though there are some of those. But it was just this very... it was really cool to feel like you were in a startup, but with the resources of a big organization.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things already coming through here, Adrienne. It sounds like failing that first exam just brought out the competitive side in you to want to succeed. And then the attraction of Deloitte was, you've just described it there as being part of a startup, albeit part of a huge, organization. It was the idea of being able to help build something. And would you say they're two of the kind of your biggest things that have kind of driven and directed your career?
Yeah, I feel like the whole idea of sacrificing short-term gain for a long-term future and doing that with a team, I think is something I've always been drawn to, even by being part of a literal sports team. This idea, I was the goalie, and I also, wasn't really the starting goalie. So I was frequently sometimes needing to look at my role as just being here to help the starting goalie get ready and prep. And we're still extremely good friends to this day, because it became this kind of, everybody has their place, even if you're not the star. And I think that I started to have a real appreciation for just competing for the sake of competition. And that I think too, when you get that first no, or I think that whether it's you failed an exam or you didn't get the job, or I think that that's where you really see somebody's character. When I'm interviewing somebody for a job, I don't really want to hear about the time that everything went well. You want to hear about the time where they failed, and then what did you do next? How did you lift yourself up? And what did you learn from it and do differently the next time? I feel like that's really been a theme, because I think then when you really succeed, it's so much sweeter when you know what it's like to have seen the other side of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so you got your FSA at Deloitte.
Yes.
Was that 2019, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So around that time you qualified, no more exams. That's great. What were you doing then? And then what kind of led to the change in 2020, which we'll come on to?
In 2019, I mean, first of all, I think there's a perception that it's much harder to pass these exams in consulting versus insurance, where the hours are a lot more intense, and that's very true. That very much was my experience, but I never really looked at it that way until later, talking to some insurance actuaries, at the fellowship admissions course, and being like, you get to just study during the day. It's not at 2 a.m. And I think that though really formed just my idea of balance, and what I was looking for in my life was not just, a 9-to-5 that was going to be more low key. I like the highs, even if they come with the lows.
Yeah.
But I think that I was starting to put together what I wanted out of the next 10 years of my career. And I was at the time actually traveling from Seattle to DC. I had done a self relocation from DC to Chicago and then Chicago to Seattle because I, in my personal life was going on this whole journey as well. And I had just met my now husband. We decided to go to Seattle for an adventure. And that was approved as long as I traveled wherever I needed to. And Monday through Thursday was headed back to DC. So that was very intense, exhausting, but a really cool project experience. So, as I entered into 2020, I actually think we wrapped up that project on like March 1st of 2020. And then I was headed back to Seattle and was like, oh, I'll see you guys in a month. We'll kick this off again.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone has a story
March
like that.
March 2020, yeah.
Yeah.
Can see where this is going.
Seattle. And then they were like, oh, I guess Seattle can't travel because one of the first cases was there. And so then it was like, oh, just Seattle's probably shutting down. And then obviously we all know what happened. So through that summer, I think I got off the road. We were all stuck in our houses. Everybody was having that moment of what am I doing? What am I spending my time on? And what's left once all of that stuff falls away? And am I happy with that? And is this how I want to spend the next decade and the decade after that, just climbing this corporate ladder? And I think in that summer, I also had become aware of these supplier diversity programs that were gaining in popularity before 2020, but had a big moment where they got a lot of funding and attention in the summer of 2020. And so at Deloitte, I was trying to find diverse teaming partners to help. We wanted to mentor them. We wanted to grow them along with the firm. We wanted to find opportunities to work together. And there really just were not a lot of small businesses out there that had gotten these certifications. So I think there was two things happening. One, I was kind of like, well, that could be an interesting way to get a start to growing the business. Now, 4 years later, it doesn't make a business on its own. You still have to be good at what you do. But these supplier diversity programs might get you a couple bonus points or an interview with a client that otherwise it'd be hard to break in on. So in the government space. So I saw that business opportunity. And then I also was working on this awesome team. I had a leader that I really looked up to, and he's a great mentor even now. I mean, we work with him now. They're a client of ours, basically.
Okay.
But I really I think there's so much that you can learn from how an organization reacts in a hard time. It's really easy to be like, oh, times are good. They're paying big bonuses and we're going and doing all these gatherings, and they're investing in employee engagement, investing in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But then when times are hard, you can really see how an organization, like the character underneath. And there was nothing different about where I was working versus any other organization. They're having to make hard decisions, and it's really hard to understand them when you're just kind of on the outside or on the bottom. But I felt like there was a way to run a professional services firm that would put people at the center and be able to. We're in a people business. When those people feel better every day, they're going to do better work for their clients. They're going to be more innovative and creative if they're more engaged. And I just felt there was this whole business case for that, and that maybe I would do it someday, until August came and I was like, okay, now I'm doing it. I have to, we don't know how long we're going to be sitting here. What's the wait? Personally, I was, didn't have kids yet. I didn't have a lot of financial responsibilities. So it was a really good time to not have a salary. I mean, if there ever is a good one, it was a time I could take that hit for who knew how long it would be, and be able to really lean into this opportunity. So I started technically incorporated in August of 2020. I stuck around for 4 more months. I told that person I was working for, and he was extremely excited for me. And I basically was like, I don't have to go now. There's a lot of paperwork I need to do. And I stayed around for 4 more months. People were like, what are you still doing here? And then on December 18th, 2020, that was actually my my 31st birthday was my last day at Deloitte, Athena's first day. And then like life took off. 6 days later, I was engaged. Things have moved very quickly since then for Athena and personally.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And that makes it very easy for you to remember the anniversaries of Athena as well. And we mentioned it very briefly earlier about the organisation NAWA, so the Network of Actuarial Women and Allies. And that was something as well that you were co-founding around that time. Is that right?
Yeah, I had been connected to Malika Bender, who's the staff DEI actuary for the CAS. She's fantastic and has done some amazing work. And at that time, she was getting approached a lot about creating something like NAWA, like an organization that would help share resources between women at different organizations, and provide this opportunity for networking and connection. And she just set up a call with 6 women she thought might be interested and was like, I think you guys would all really enjoy working together. I think this should exist. I don't have time to do it. And so 3 of us were like, I'm totally in. And so it was myself, Amber Rohde, and Sandy Lowe. And was about 6 months or so after I'd started Athena. So a lot of things about starting a nonprofit are similar, just in paperwork, and you need a CPA, and you need to have your agreement in place, and register the organization in a state, and things like that I had been familiar with Athena. So that was really helpful to leverage. And then also, similar to Athena, you can have all of the logistics on paper, but actually the way more important part is clarifying the vision and where you want the organization to go, and then getting people excited about it. So that was what we focused on for that first year. And we just had an overwhelming response from the industry. Lots of people who wanted to volunteer and support and host events. And it was, and lots of organizations that donated to help for the costs and to fund these events. And so NAWA was a really cool thing to be working on alongside Athena. I didn't have very much extra time to like sleep, but it was a really, I think it was what I needed to almost have closure, or to feel like I had made the change that I had been looking for when I was sitting there in 2020 being like, what is it all for? Like, what are we doing? And it was like, everything I'm spending a year later, everything I was spending my time on was things I was so passionate about. And then the next step was being able to pay myself and like make it into a living, because you can do a lot of things you're passionate about that don't make any money. But the first step was following passion, and then I think the other stuff falls into place.
But just very briefly on NAWA, is it located in just one state, or does it cover the whole of the country?
It's technically we're national all over the U.S. and actually have some potential partnerships internationally that we're looking at for virtual events and things like that. But for right now, there's different events that are hosted both in person and virtually across the U.S. We've had events in New York and Chicago and Minneapolis. And there's a LinkedIn that you can follow for more information, and a newsletter you can subscribe through the website also.
No, that's great. And what sort of membership or affiliation do you think you might have now in terms of interested women?
Oh, that's a good question. I technically took a step back when I went on maternity leave, and I think it's probably grown even since then. I know that on LinkedIn, they right now have over 3,000 followers.
Right, okay. No, that's
so
great.
They're definitely getting up there, and I think that there's different ways we slice the membership, but I think that they have hundreds of people that are regularly engaged. And it's really neat, because even through volunteer work, that's where I've made my best connections in things that either have just been great personal friendships, or have been great for my business, or just great people to have on a board of advisors and things like that. I think that through volunteer work, it's the best place to get exposed to people that are just outside of your regular day to day.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of very active and awesome volunteers from NAWA.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, we'll share links to that organisation for anybody who wants to look into that. Let's come back to the role that pays you the salary then. And so Athena, from the start, was it just yourself, maybe two people, and what have you grown to now?
Yeah, so it was just me that day in December 2020.
Yeah, on your birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
one person party.
I've been a volunteer with the SOA and a couple other, the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. So I started to try to activate some of those relationships to start and get some subcontract work. And so that worked pretty slowly, but in government work, you've got to be ready for a long runway because it could take, honestly, 2 or 3 years sometimes to actually get something to convert into a sale and start work. So I knew that was the case, and I did not start any of the Athena kind of opportunity seeking until December 18th, 2020. So I, by July, had enough work that if I wanted to keep growing, entrepreneurs that are in that early stage, or some stay a solopreneur, where it's just one person, your marketing, your finance, your sales, you're also delivering all the work. And I started to realize that I financially was not in a place where I could hire someone, but if I wanted to grow a company as opposed to just a small one-person shop, I had to, once the projects started flowing in, I had to prioritize getting help. Otherwise, I would just stay kind of drowning in that cycle. But it's really hard for those that have grown a business from one person, because you're like, oh, I can finally maybe take something out of the business financially, and you have to funnel it right back in. And it's, and then more. You're like, how will I dig myself out of this hole and start to turn it into what I had envisioned? And I think it's a combination of planning and luck. But I think you get more luck when you work harder. So that summer, I knew that one of somebody I had worked with at my prior job left and went to get her master's in business analytics. And so I reached out to Lauren and asked if she wanted some part-time work and to join Athena, just while she's in grad school. Well, it's a very long story, but fast forward 4 years to today, she's my full-time internal chief of staff and basically runs all of Athena's operations. Right. So she's been with me since the beginning. It has a huge impact on the business. But we went from, 1 to 1.5, and then I had a couple 1099 contractors helping. We had a really amazing win the following spring, and then things just took off. So today we're at 25 employees, 20 to 25, depending on how you count it. We have some 1099s. We have some people in different forms of employment because I converted the business to a partnership last year. Okay. So now I have 2 business partners. These employees, we've grown to over $3 million in revenue, in annual revenue, and forged partnerships with different firms, with different clients that we consult directly, government agencies mostly. And then we work with a lot of other small businesses. We love working, teaming up with other small businesses.
Yeah, and I think you said that, and you mentioned it earlier, in terms of what's been at the heart of Athena is the way that the business is run, the values you have, and it being focused around people. Can you tell me a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, it's both the greatest joy and opportunity and just the biggest challenge to run a professional services firm that wants to provide balance and benefits and high compensation and all the things that when you work at a big company, you're like, why don't they just do that? I think once I got into it, it was we will continue to prove that this is possible. The hardest thing is probably providing somebody with whatever their version of balance is in a client service field. At the end of the day, your clients you have to adhere to their demands because they're paying you, and that's what's paying that salary. So it's a constant balance and identifying what's reasonable. But I think the biggest thing that I think differentiates working at Athena versus potentially at another consulting firm is just the permission to question whether something's reasonable and be like, you know what? They just sent it at 7:00 at night. They want it done by 9:00 tomorrow. Are we allowed to ask why? Are we allowed to point out the work's not going to be done well? It's not. And that I think that the permission to ask those questions and pressure test a little bit how urgent something might really be, and explain that, we strive to provide our employees the kind of balance that just doesn't mesh with the way that you're asking for things. But at the same time, they're also, again, paying you. So it's a constant balance. And on the other side is it's really expensive to employ. It's really expensive to grow, even as a virtual company. But I think that the people who are working here, they're here because they trust that myself and the other leaders are going to make those decisions with people at the center as much as is financially possible. And I think that we've pushed the bounds of that. And it's been a really interesting and sometimes stressful experiment of how far can you push that? And I think that the most critical part is just having a leadership team that's all on the same page, that we're here to prove that that's possible, and we're willing to sacrifice, our own financial position or whatever it takes to provide this to people, because we believe that it's something they're entitled to in exchange for the work that they're doing. And so I think that that's been my favorite part, and the biggest challenge is just continuing to make decisions in that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it sounds like that's been at the heart of everything from the start. And you talked about looking ahead for your next, how your career might develop, how things at Athena might develop. Do things look good for the next 12 months, 5 years or so?
Yeah, we just went through a really interesting exercise through the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS. It's very popular for small businesses. And it's been a really cool exercise for me to essentially step back and rephrase Athena's mission, vision, target market, and values, and see that they're very consistent with the ones that I put in place in 2020, sitting there up on my kitchen wall in Seattle, being like, this is what I want it to look like. It's very consistent, but I think now it's owned by the whole leadership team. Yeah. And that's a really cool experience for us, because I think now we all feel so strongly that these are the values and the things that are going to get us there. I feel really good about the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years after going through that exercise. I think we're all very clear on wanting to create this generational partnership, something that provides the opportunity for people to grow and develop and eventually have ownership in the firm that they helped build. That's really trickles down to a lot of the way that we run the business. That influences the structure of the business and the way that you compensate and the way that you the types of people you attract. So I think that we've gotten really clear on that 10-year vision. And then the 3-year and the 1 year that gets us there falls into place. Yeah. Because if you think about, a company that's trying to grow and exit is going to just have a very different in between from one that's trying to grow into a sustainable partnership that someone wants to buy into. Profitability still matters because it needs to be able to support the growing partnership. But I think it's less of a profitability at all costs type of mentality, because it has to be something attractive to buy into, both profit-wise and that somebody feels good about the entity that they're buying into. So that's been a great clarifier, and it actually is just exactly in line with the vision that I had in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, Adrienne, I want to kind of finish off today, the podcast today, the question that I ask all actuaries, and it's in relation to, if you can think back to when you qualified and somebody around that stage of their career, so maybe nearly or newly qualified, what piece of advice would you give now to somebody who's at that stage of their career looking forward for the next 12 months, 3 years, or even 10 years?
I think that I was unique in my near obsession with competition. I think that, especially with myself, like I was looking to grow to that next level just for the sake of getting there. And I don't know that that is extremely common. And I even think post-pandemic is less common because we're like, who are we doing that for? But I think that something to still consider for those that are newly credentialed is just to keep powering through, even if you become unsure of what you're going to do with your credentials. Even if you end up in a non-actuarial role completely, there are so many things that you learn through the exam process and the experience as an actuarial analyst. They're going to set you up for success in that role. I'm doing very little actuarial work at this time in my career. The role of CEO is taking up the majority of my time, doing a lot of sales and things that it's really important for me to know how to talk about actuarial work. And so I think that for me, there's so many paths that you can take as an actuary, and don't focus too much on knowing what you're going to do for 30 years because there may be a pandemic that comes out of nowhere and shifts you completely off your path. But I think you'll never regret having the credentials. Once you take a break, there's a very low chance that you're going to go back because that free time is very sweet. And I think that being an actuary, it's marketable in so many industries, and it gives you this unique lens to view risks and opportunities. It gives you an understanding of financial statements. It gives you this way of processing information that's very valuable no matter which direction you go. So I think while I was obsessed with continuing on this ladder for my own reasons, I think others, before you are like, I'm going to take 6 months off and think if I really want to do this, just keep going. Like, think about it, but like just keep powering through those exams. Because having the FSA and the people you meet along the way and the just all of the things will help you get to where you end up. I think that it's really important to take that into account. And also, my last piece of advice would be to just network, no matter where you are. If you're standing in line for an exam, if you're, just at some random work event and you don't see how it's really going to benefit you right now, just connect with people. It's been so beneficial to me to have a strong network, whether it was for professional opportunities or just people I stay in touch with and we just vent about, whatever it is in our jobs, or just have a sounding board, have this people that I can call for advice. It's a very small world, the actuarial world. And I think it's really important to not be thinking in a short-term way about your network. Just continue to meet people and grow that. And I think things like LinkedIn can really help with it. But at the end of the day, it's really connecting with people.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. No, that's fantastic advice. And actually they seem quite linked to each other, not being too short-term in your thinking, whether that's with relationships, network, or even worrying too much about what direction your career might go in. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Adrienne. Thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed talking to you. And we'll stop there for today and look forward to the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.